Tupac Shakur, Biggie Smalls, P. Diddy, Suge Knight, Keefe D, gangster rap. Who really killed Tupac and Biggie? Was someone involved from the LAPD? Here's where you find out the truth on the Game of Crimes. Hey gang, welcome back to the next episode of Game of Crimes with Murph in the morning. You know what? I say this every week, and I mean it every week. I can't thank you enough for taking the time to come back and give me your attention for another 3 days. I'm sorry, 2 hours. You know what we do here. Our guest doesn't, so we're going to surprise him today. But truly, I'm so thankful for you, what you come back for. I couldn't do any of this without you. So it's in all sincerity when I say these thank yous. I'm not just saying them. But like I do say every week too, we brought in another special guest. This guy, we met, I'm going to guess it's been over a year ago. It might have been 2 years ago. And he's somebody that I've always wanted to bring on the show. And I got a copy of his book, and we'll go ahead and tell you what it is now. It's Murder Rap, the untold story of the Biggie Smalls and Tupac Shakur murder investigations. And I'm going to mention it again at the end of the podcast because we're going to promote his book here as much as we can. But I got to reading his book, man, the names, I'm like, holy cow, I can't keep up with who's doing what or anything. So he was patient with me. I've done a lot of research on this now, but luckily we're going to get the story from the horse's mouth, so to speak, today. So it's a true honor and pleasure to introduce today's guest, Greg Kading. Greg, welcome to the show, brother.
Hey, Murph. Thanks for having me, buddy. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, and I appreciate your patience with me because getting old. And we'll get into his background, but listen, ladies and gentlemen, you talk to a 25-year veteran law enforcement professional here. So that's who Greg is, and we'll talk a little bit more. I did have a little bit of technical difficulty getting going this morning, but he persevered, and I'm not smart enough to tell him how to fix things, so he figured it out. Good job, Greg.
Well, barely. I mean, by the skin of my teeth, I got it figured out, so hopefully this will go without much more fanfare.
Well, you may have a career in the tech background, if you know what I mean, because I don't.
Not likely. I mean, it took both of us to figure that out, so.
Yeah. How many cops does it take?
Exactly.
For our regular listeners, we love doing our small town police blotter first thing and get this thing rolling. We talk about some very serious topics here. This is a game about crime. This is a interview about bad people doing bad things to good people. Now, we take the stories very seriously, but, we're going to have a little bit of fun because what we're going to talk about shortly is very serious. And to start this off, Greg has been gracious enough to, he's got a story for us about a really intelligent criminal who has a future in crime from California. So, Greg, I'll return it over to you, brother.
But California, like Florida, I'm sure it never has a shortage of stupid criminals. So
that's exactly right.
Yeah, the one that came to mind was this individual that was in a Spider-Man costume up in Modesto, California, and tries to purse snatch a lady's purse. Ultimately, he gets it, but he's apprehended shortly thereafter. The woman actually thought that he was armed with a gun, but it turned out he was just armed with a pipe. But again, it's hard to remain very anonymous when you're running around. And when the cops questioned him, they're like, what the hell were you thinking? He's like, well, that was just my disguise, as if there were going to be a whole bunch of other Spider-Man impersonators running around the street. So again, just... you can't make yourself any more identifiable than to put on a superhero costume and go out and start committing crimes.
You hear about these criminals, being veteran law enforcement, a lot of criminals, when they pull these robberies, they have a change of clothes on. They'll take their jacket and turn it inside out. They'll pull their sweatshirt off so they get a different color on, things like that. But not this guy.
Right. I wonder what he had under his Spider-Man costume. Was he Superman underneath?
Yeah,
it's like, I'm not sure. I'm Superman.
I'm not sure I want to see that. Bunch of winners here. And I don't know if you know this, Greg, but I have a Patreon subscriber channel also. It's patreon.com/Game of Crimes. And one of the monthly episodes is You Can't Make This Shit Up.
Yeah.
And it's a whole hour of these stupid stories.
But you know how it is when you hang out with cops. It's just one story after another. Everybody's got one that's better than the last. And so you sit around and kind of compare experiences and compare all the nonsense that you've seen or heard or witnessed.
That's the truth. That's the truth. So now I'll share a story from Florida with Greg here. We're talking about a couple of newlyweds. I mean, this one just brings a whole new meaning to how to celebrate your honeymoon. So hours after exchanging vows on a Florida beach, vows, not vowels, vows on a Florida beach,
Could have been
a
both.
newly, I am a country boy. That's just the way it comes out, right? A newlywed couple was arrested after they got intoxicated and began battering each other inside a hotel room. Daniel Gillen, now he's 61 years old, and Gigi Raposta, she's 49. They were married on Clearwater Beach. And I swear, man, it seems like 90% of the crazy crime stories I bring on here come from Tampa, Clearwater, St. Pete area over there on the West Coast. Anyway, Gillen told the cops that Raposta physically started to attack him by scratching him on the chest. That doesn't say was that an act of passion or what. It just that just happened. And when they checked, Gillen had noticeable scratch marks and injuries to his torso, which was consistent with his statements, according to the cops. Now, Raposta said that Gillen grabbed her by the neck and pushed her to the ground. And Raposta's claim was supported by noticeable scratches and scrapes marks on her knee. All right. Gillen, the guy, was arrested for misdemeanor domestic battery and was later released from custody on his own recognizance. But Miss Raposta, this is not her first time. She had a prior battery conviction, so she was charged with felony battery, and she had to post a $500 cash bond. A judge has ordered the newlyweds to have no contact with each other. Just got married. Court filings list the couple's residence as a home in Davenport, a city about 90 miles inland from Clearwater Beach. So I'm just wondering, I wonder if they ever consummated that marriage.
You got to wonder if that's how they consummate them. Hey, this is like one of a freak off. It's like one of these, who knows what is actually going on. It sounds like they're made for each other.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he got a younger woman there. He's 61, she's 49. So hang on there, big boy.
Maybe that was part of the frustration.
There's so many places we could go with this story.
Yeah, what's in the water in Clearwater?
It's I don't know. I saw somebody dropping some of this little blue pills in there. I'm not sure what was going on.
Right.
Anyway, it'd be interesting to see if the evidence could stand up in court, huh? Oh, that was bad.
Yeah, exactly. Here we go.
Yeah. So anyway, Greg, thank you so much for playing along there. We do have a good time with some of these stories that come across, but
I can't wait to hear about the honeymoon. The honeymoon story is going to be even better, man. We have to keep tabs on these two.
They could probably make a movie out of these. I don't know. It could be. I'm not going to go there. It's just going to get worse and worse.
That's exactly.
Those are the kind of things you talk about in a bar, right?
Yeah.
But to get us going here, I wanted to let our listeners know how Greg and I met here. Our regular listeners, you've heard me talk about the Southern California Gang Conference. In fact, I've got one of their free T-shirts, everybody. By the way, Murph likes free T-shirts. So that's where most of my T-shirts come from, is somebody was gracious enough to give them to me. But Mel Sosa, one of the organizers out there, told me all about Greg, 2-3 years ago. And Greg has gotten a lot more popular on interviews here recently, as I found out when I was doing some research on him. But we like to bring people on here that talk about some of the biggest criminal stories that are in the news and that are listed in history here in the United States, as well as other parts of the world. So when I found out, I don't know much about rappers. I did recognize the name Tupac Shakur and Biggie Smalls, but that's about as far as it went. I knew they were both killed. Well, after actually getting in and doing research on Greg's book, it got really interesting. And now there's been some developments over, I guess, late 23 and here in 2024 that we're going to get into talk about. And even to the point where I think an individual, what do they call him? P. Diddy? Is that it? Diddy Combs?
Yeah, so Puffy's in the news big time right now. P. Diddy, he's in the news because of all kinds of allegations against him that date back quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
Not as far as the murders, because the murders date back obviously to 96 and 97. But, historically, all of the drama that he's encountered and been involved in is all kind of culminating right now.
Yeah, so we're going to get into all that. This is going to be a really good interview. But before we get into the investigation itself, Greg here has a 25-year law enforcement career. I know he's worked a lot of other cases. But, Greg, typically what we do is just ask you a little bit about your background to start with, the Reader's Digest version, where you grew up, what your family dynamics were, where you went to school? Did you have brothers and sisters? Anybody else in law enforcement? That kind of thing.
Yeah, so I was born up in the Reno, Nevada area, actually living in Lake Tahoe, but happened to be in Reno, Nevada when we went to the hospital and I was born. So I was first 11 years up in Lake Tahoe, California. Beautiful place to grow up. It's up in the mountains and skiing, very healthy kind of wilderness environment. And then when I was raised by a single mom and had two older sisters, so we all migrated down to Southern California. My mom was on her way down to Mexico to meet up with a boyfriend that she had at the time. And the intention was to hook up with him down in Mexico and then come back across the border as if we'd been a family traveling abroad, just an innocent kind of Mexico vacation. But the truth was that he was down there procuring drugs and that we were going to be a front for that, for that goal to get the drugs back into the U.S. Obviously, I'm a young kid. I don't know any of this, but this is what, ultimately my mom revealed. It never happened because we were in Laguna Beach, which is Southern California, just an hour and a half away from the border. And my mom gets news that that individual, the guy, had been arrested down there and never to be heard of again, by the way, never to be heard from again. And so that stopped us in our tracks. So now we're kind of like just vagabonds in Southern California, and we take up residence, and that's kind of why we got settled down in SoCal.
Just one quick question. Did your mom know? Did she understand what was going on with?
Yeah, she knew what was going on. My mom was a hippie and kind of back into the days of the early 70s. That was just part of the culture that she was involved in, and the type of people she was involved in. So we ended up staying in SoCal, and I go to school, start playing sports. One of my sporting teams, a Pop Warner football team, I befriended a guy named Todd, and Todd's dad was a cop, and he became a big mentor for me because I was a wayward kid. I didn't have any kind of male influence, and as he began to mentor me, I grew closer and closer with his family, essentially kind of got adopted into his household, and then he led me towards my career in law enforcement. So when I was 20, I was still kind of a little bit troublesome. And he's like, Greg, if you don't get your shit together, you're probably going to end up in serious trouble. And I said, you haven't fucked up so bad yet that it would preclude you from getting a job. And this is a good career. So that's how it all started for me. I just wanted a good job, and I needed some direction. And,
thank God he came into your life, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. He's the greatest influence I've ever had.
Wow. That's very commendable on his part. Is he still living?
He is. He's 88 years old.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's an old cowboy, tough as nails. And to this day, I attribute anything and everything that I had to his willingness to step in and be involved in some kid's life who just really at the end of it was just a friend of his kid.
That's so reassuring to hear. That's a man being a man and a father being a father.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I love it. So from there, just out of curiosity, what do your sisters do?
One of my sisters passed about 5-6 years ago. She was struggling with alcoholism, and it ultimately led to her demise. My other sister lives in Salt Lake City area of Utah, and she's just a single mom, and it's just kind of like struggling through life herself right now.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, we're glad that you came out on the good end of this.
Yeah, by the grace of God, there go I.
Absolutely, and I'm not condemning anybody. We don't do that here on Game of Crimes. This is it's just a fact of your life, and I kind of like it because it's somewhat motivational that you didn't have everything going in your favor, but thank God a young man stepped in and took an interest in you, and here you are now, Game of Crimes. You've made it to the top. When you were in high school, did you play any sports, or were you too busy getting in trouble?
I was doing a little bit of both, actually. I was playing sports. I was playing football, and then I had played baseball prior to high school, but in junior high days. I was never really much of an athlete, but I liked the camaraderie and the idea of being part of a team and meeting people. And so that was always fun for me. I was never like a standout athlete. So, I think in my sophomore junior high year is when I quit playing sports.
What position did you play in football?
I was essentially the guy who would run in a play, barely touch
Okay,
the ball.
understood.
I was a wide receiver. Then a kind of just a little caveat to this whole thing. So my buddy that I mentioned earlier, who was on my Pop Warner football team and became my best friend, whose dad mentored me, he was a really excellent athlete, and he was given a scholarship to go to a prominent college and play on a football team. His very first game of his freshman year, he breaks his neck and becomes a quadriplegic.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, and so after that happened, because we're 18, I've already moved out of the house, and he's going to need 24-hour care at that time. So I moved back in and went and lived with the family again until that period of time when I turned 20 and qualified as a police officer. So it's this real tragic story, but it's also a really inspirational story about a young man overcoming actual adversity, breaking his neck, and he goes on to become a lawyer. He finishes his degree at Cal State Long Beach, gets a law degree from UCLA, starts to practice law at the DA's office, all of this as a quadriplegic.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's the most inspirational person I've ever known in my life, who I consider a brother. But this also reflects on that father figure who was his dad, and his ability to encourage his son under those circumstances to overcome them and become a success.
That's fantastic. That's very admirable. We always say, don't give up, never give up, and certainly don't give up hope, regardless of what your situation is. And that guy, wow, that's called leadership.
Yeah.
That's accepting your circumstances and making the best of it. And wow, that's a very motivational story.
Yeah, it's a great story.
That might be somebody we want to bring on here. You never know. We may have to talk about that down the road a little bit. Okay, so now, did you go to law enforcement first, or did you go to college out of high school?
No, I went to college out of high school. So what happened was with Todd, who was, already involved in, his college, when he broke his neck, the college made concessions so that they would give a free education to his caregiver, which became me. So
Nice.
I could go to college now for free as I would just accompany Todd, my friend, and we would go to classes together. So now I'm getting an education that I never expected to get because of his circumstances. But the college was so gracious that they accommodated this so that Todd could continue and finish the education that he started.
Wow, and that was Cal State Long Beach, you said?
Yeah, Cal State. Yes.
Wow. Well, thank goodness for them standing up doing the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Was he was on scholarship, right?
He was.
Because he got injured, did that scholarship continue?
It did. They honored it for him because of those circumstances, and out of compassion, they continued to honor his scholarship and did anything and everything they possibly could with AIDS, and you can imagine all the things concessions that must take place for a person who's essentially confined to a wheelchair.
Right. Wow. I mean, that's just so encouraging to hear. Doing the right thing never gets old. I like that.
Yeah.
So you, did both of you guys get degrees in what, in criminal justice or something else?
Yeah, he got his political science degree and went on, like I mentioned, to pursue a law degree at UCLA. When I was 20, I was kind of in college just by default. And so after a couple of years, when the opportunity came to join a law enforcement agency, I shifted my focus there.
But not to downplay your role here, being a caregiver to a quadriplegic, that's not something you do when you want to do. That's like a 24/7 job right there, isn't it?
It is, unless it's your best friend. It kind of changes the dynamics. This wasn't a stranger. It's not something I was doing out of obligation as a profession. It was just something that I loved the guy, and we were best friends, and it just seemed like if he needed something, I couldn't deny that.
I tell you what, Greg, you were already up here on a pedestal. You took a couple steps up there, brother. That's very admirable that you did that as well. I mean, you think about it, seriously, how many guys do we know that they'd say, oh, well, I'm sorry that happened to him, and they would move on with their lives and not look back. And that's the reality. I think it's not just our profession. I think Actually, I think in our profession, we might be more in tune to look out for each other. And this is even before you had a profession.
It is, but I was getting something out of it too, and that was the family that I felt that I'd never had, with a father figure and an intact family in a household. And so there was some fulfillment for me to be a part of that. So it wasn't a sacrifice so much as it was just what you would expect to do in a setting like.
Yeah. Well, God bless you and your friend there for, what would you say his first name was?
Todd Hart, Hart.
Yeah. God bless both of you. I'm sorry for what he went through, but thank the good Lord that he had you in his life to help him get along.
Yeah.
Sounds like he didn't need a whole lot of help.
No, we're still thick as thieves. I mean, we talk. Yeah, we talk several times a week, and I go see him. He's only a half hour away from me.
Very good. Very good.
As a matter of fact, I just married his daughter. Not me married. I officiated over his daughter's wedding 2 weeks ago. One of his kids got married.
I saw that, I'm trying to find it here now, that you had gone to, after college, you'd also gone to Calvary University. Are you an ordained minister?
I'm not an ordained minister. No, I just pursued a degree in theology. It's always been a subject that I'm fascinated with, and it's one of my favorite things to talk about. So these days, you're basically, as an officiant, you don't necessarily have to be ordained. The technical aspect of marriage takes place at the courthouse when you get your marriage license.
Yeah.
So I kind of just stood in as a figurehead and officiated over the wedding.
Very cool.
I've done it a bunch of times. I'm successful 9 out of 10. So yeah, I know, right? One didn't work.
Well, but you know what? Today's society, 90%, staying married, not being divorced, that's kind of unheard of. So you're doing pretty good there. Baseball, you'd be batting 900.
Fingers crossed. Yeah.
It's a shame my dad was, he's been passed for a number of years, but he was a Southern Baptist minister and graduated from Bob Jones University, a theological seminary in South Carolina. And I tell you what, he's the strongest man I ever met in my life. He's a big man. He's 6'4". He's maybe the most intelligent man I've ever met. Grew up in the mountains of West Virginia, extreme poverty. The whole family was coal miners, and he became a minister and speak Latin. But it'd be interesting to have you two sit there and talk theology. I would probably not understand a thing that y'all were talking about, but it's not going to happen. He's already gone. But go ahead.
Nothing would make a father feel better than what you just said about your own dad. I mean, to say that he's the strongest and most intelligent man that you've ever met, I can't imagine a more meaningful compliment for a father to hear. And I'm sure you told him that when he was around.
Well, I owe him so many apologies. And one day when we see each other again, I'll probably spend all that time apologizing, because I guess you said troublesome youth. Yeah, I kind of fit that mold. You always hear that preachers' kids are the worst. Well, if you look up PK in the dictionary, you might see my picture there. That's I had my first run with the cops when I was 10 years old, and I think that's probably why I went into law enforcement, because I just thought that was so cool. They were very. This was back in the 60s in Tennessee. You could, cops had discretion to do the right thing.
Right.
Not so much anymore. They just tie the cops' hands now.
Yeah. There used to be a thing called spirit of the law.
Yeah.
We don't practice that much anymore.
No. And it's nothing against the state where you live, California, but God bless all the cops out there. I know a ton of cops from Sacramento down to San Diego. And I always ask them, how do you put up with the crap that goes on out here, especially in the federal court in the 9th District out there?
Yeah. I don't know either. I don't imagine I'd survive it these days. I retired in 2010, and even then it was getting more and more curious. Nowadays, I just don't know how. Yeah, it's frustrating.
We always say here on the show, God bless our men and women in law enforcement, the military, and all our first responders, because it takes special people to do what they do, put up the crap they put up with, especially nowadays. Okay, so you didn't start out at LAPD. You started out somewhere else, didn't you?
Yeah, the Orange County Sheriff's Department, which was the agency that the aforementioned mentor, my friend's dad, was a lieutenant there. So he kind of paved the road for me.
Nice.
Yeah, So I started out with the Orange County Sheriff's Department, went into the academy in January of 86, graduated in May of 86, and started working in the jails. Once I'd been in the jails for a couple of years and starting, my theory is that the Sheriff's Department that runs the jails, it's a great program to have brand new officers or deputies go into the jail system to kind of learn how to deal with the dynamics of the criminal world, but within a controlled environment. Looks 20, 21, 22, 23 years old. You might be just a little bit too young and don't have the life experience to really be going out and getting in the middle of everybody else's business. So I think it's a really great nurturing process. But then at some point it gets to where you need to get out of there because you start becoming institutionalized, And so, I was ready to go after a couple of years and was looking at opportunities beyond, and I saw LAPD was hiring, so I applied up there and started the whole process over.
I tell you what, God, I'm doing a lot of God blessing this morning, but all our correctional officers and the deputies that have to work in the jails, I just could not do it. When I was in college, before I became a cop, I did an internship with the sheriff's office and pretty much spent 5 weeks in the summer inside the jail. And it was just, there was nothing in there that attracted me. But I mean, in California, you guys with the gang activity that goes on inside the prisons there in the jails, that's a whole different thing than just housing somebody that's doing a year in the county jail. It requires a lot of expertise and experience and knowledge of what's going on their side. It's amazing. The guys that actually do that now, especially the gang investigators, are very impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. They've got to be really informed as to what's going on and how to properly classify people so you don't get the wrong people housed with other people that pose a danger to them. So yeah, it's all part of that process, especially back in the mid 80s and the 90s. I mean, a lot of the stuff with gangs was really just in the early 80s, really just coming to fruition and trying to keep tabs of it and learn about it all. Yeah, it took a lot of, I think, insight by gang investigators.
Yeah. So you go into the LAPD Academy. We've had a few LAPD guys on here before. Just had, oh my goodness, he's going to kill me. This getting old thing just gets harder and harder.
Was it Jamie McBride?
Jamie Can't believe
I love it.
His name just whips right out of my mind.
Yeah.
What a hoot.
It's not a hard guy to, that's a hard guy to forget. You know, Jamie's such a character. He's just a force to be reckoned with. I've known Jamie since he was a young cop in LAPD. We worked in Newton Division together. And so, know Jamie very well. Shooting Newton. So Jamie's a great guy.
He is. He was, I tell you what, I laughed so much during his interview and even building up to the interview and afterwards, I had tears. I kept having to dry my eyes as we were talking. He had me laughing so much.
He's a funny guy.
He is. We had his brother on several months ago who was up in San Bernardino City. And then his daughter, Tony, I'm hoping to get her on here soon. I think she's finally got final adjudication on her shooting event.
Yeah, good news for her. She finally got cleared of everything regarding that incident.
Yeah, and it was a good shoot to start with. And that's, it's just amazing how defense attorneys and criminals can drag crap out. And the people that are out there that are protecting and defending us, or their names, their reputations, and themselves are drugged through the mud. And it's all BS. It's all bullshit.
Yeah, the process is its own. It's his own. Even if you get cleared, let's say, even though you come out like, hey, everything you did was within policy, it was appropriate. The process itself still is punishing.
It is.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah, and if you don't have that strong personality, it'll make you doubt yourself. And then, and doing that, would that cause you to hesitate when you're out on the street and you can't afford to hesitate? It's just, it's horrible the way our law enforcement heroes are treated today here in the United States, and I'm guessing other parts of the world as well. Anyway, that's Murph's little opinion there. I was a cop for 38 years. What do you think I'm going to say, right? Although we do make a point of saying here on Game of Crimes, there's nobody hates a bad cop more than a good cop. So all the bad cops out there, they should be put under the jail because they make us all look bad. And when you're entrusted with the public's trust and you're authorized to carry a weapon and take life legally, if necessary. It's a huge responsibility. And for you to, not you, but for those individuals that decide to go the wrong way, to besmirch the oath that we all take to protect and defend, man, it just really ticks me off. But that's not what we're here to talk about.
Well, I always make a point whenever somebody's hypercritical of law enforcement, because we do. We've got bad apples.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we know that there's bad apples? The only way you know that there's bad apples is because good apples has exposed them, right? You know, any bad cop is exposed because an investigation took place by good, honest cops and brought all of that to light. So I've always tried to make a point is that you only know about bad cops because good cops, you know, pushed them out.
Excellent point, too. And the other thing is, don't convict them. We give the criminals every bit of leeway we possibly can, because we being law enforcement don't want to put the wrong person in jail. So when accusations are made, just because it's in the media or it's on the internet does not make it true. And a perfect example is John Mattingly with Louisville Police Department and the Breonna Taylor shooting. Those police officers were vilified. They were almost crucified. And all the sports stars and movie stars and politicians that came out in support of Breonna Taylor. John will be the first one. He was a guest here on the show also a couple of years. In fact, he came out and spoke at the Southern California Gang Conference 2 years ago also. And we've got to be friends. He'll be the first to tell you there was absolutely no reason for Breonna Taylor to die that night. It was her boyfriend. He's the one that caused the whole thing. He's lied about it all along. What the state of Kentucky do, they dismissed the charges on him. They gave him a huge payout. It's just outrageous. And now you're seeing where some of the other officers that were involved in that charges have been dismissed. So and John was the only person other than Breonna that was shot that night. Thank God one of the police officers had a tourniquet and saved his life. He got shot in the leg there. Okay.
Well, I said, just the process itself it victimizes you just by the nature of the process, because you're often perceived as guilty before proven innocent.
Yeah. If you ever get a chance to meet John, he's a very interesting individual. I've never seen him get upset. All these accusations, he stays cool, calm, and collected throughout the whole thing. So just really proud of him. Now, when you go through the LAPD Academy, I went through the State Police Academy in West Virginia, and then I went through the DEA Academy with the feds. And in the DEA Academy, if you did something that was a little questionable, you had to put it in writing. You had to explain to your instructors what you did. We call it writing a memo. You know, it's teaching you to write how the government speaks, I guess. Did you ever have any instances like that going through the LA Academy? Any funny things you want to tell us about?
Man, well, it's funny how the rules kind of change in a certain. We had a guy in our academy that wasn't supposed to. He'd been issued his gun, but he hadn't been issued ammunition. And we weren't supposed to take the guns home at that point because we haven't had firearm training.
Yeah.
But he decides that he's going to go home and pack. It's a revolver. This is back when they were issuing 38 revolvers. And he's speed loading and practicing. And he gets he's very intense type of guy. So he decides, well, I'm going to do this in the dark. I want to be so good at speed loading under all circumstances. I'm going to do it in the dark. And so he ends up having an accidental discharge. He fires around. It goes right through the door of his apartment out into the hallway where there were some people. Nobody got struck by it, thank God. But he decides he's going to try to justify this story by saying that he thought someone was trying to break into the apartment instead of just falling on the sword and saying, I screwed up. Well, yeah. So under those today, just the false and misleading statements would have been enough to eliminate him. But he kept his job and actually went on to have a great career. He's a real character. So I don't know. The academy was just full of different personalities. Like, what are you doing here? And they could have said the same thing about me. Like Greg, didn't you get arrested when you were 15 years old? Don't you have a felony conviction? I had gotten arrested for having nunchucks.
Oh, yeah?
When I was a teenager, but that was sealed because I was a juvenile. So even though it was a conviction, technically it's a felony.
Were you using them or were you just in possession of them?
No, I was 16. They were in the trunk of my car and I'd gotten pulled over. And when they searched the trunk, they found, what led to the search, this is funny too, and I'll try not to digress too much. But when it got pulled over and they thought it was a DUI, it wasn't drinking or anything like that. But I was this long-haired kid, and I'm driving a Trans Am, and then
Oh
like,
yeah, I
okay,
had one of those.
yeah. So he
Yeah.
pulls me over, and he finds these things that are kind of embedded in the carpet that he thinks are like marijuana buds. There's these marijuana. They were burrs, like burrs from the dogs that would get caught up in their hair. And he's like, "You have weed." I was like, "It's not weed." He's like, "Oh, okay. Well, this gives him now probable cause to search the car for more drugs." So he
Yep.
pops the trunk and finds the nunchucks. And he's like, illegal weapon. And back then I thought I was Johnny Karate running around
Oh.
thinking I was a badass and practicing with these nunchucks. So I ended up, I ended up having to clean up beaches for like 8 weekends as community service.
That's
I don't know how I got off on the story. Anyways, in the academy, people thought, "What are you doing here, Kading? You don't
yeah.
belong here."
Yeah, no, it's and not that we're prying, and there are no gotcha moments in Game of Crimes, but funny stories are always welcome. That just shows you. I mean, I could have gone thin blue line. I could have gone left as well as going right. Thank goodness that you have positive influences in your life that you don't make that left-hand turn.
Absolutely.
When you come out of the academy, you were with LAPD, what, 22 years? Is that right?
Yeah, just over 22. I started in 88, left in 2010.
So you come out, you start on patrol,
Mm-hmm.
and then from there, do you progress into the detective bureau? What was your progression there?
Yeah, so initially I was, when I was doing my probation, my rookie year, I was on patrol. And then after I got off probation, because I had prior law enforcement experience, it gave me a little bit of an advantage over the other one-year cops at the LAPD. And so I quickly was recruited into our gang unit, which was known as Crash back then.
Mm-hmm.
So I got into the Crash unit at Newton Division, and that led to a bunch of different task force assignments over the next 5 or 6 years. In 99, I make detective. I go to Wilshire Division. I work gangs there, then get into homicide. Then from there, I go to narcotics, and from there, I go to robbery, homicide. So it was just kind of a progression that the vast majority of my time was all assigned to various task forces, including the DEA. You're familiar with HIDA, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I was assigned to hide in Atlanta for a while. So you went to gangs to homicide? Is that what you said? Or robbery?
No, I went from gangs to homicide.
And then from homicide to narcotics.
And then from homicide to narcotics, and then back to homicide.
Okay. And then I think I read you were retired from robbery, homicide.
Right.
Yeah, we had a Metro-Dade homicide investigator on here. I think 22 years of his 27 years, he worked homicide in Dade County. And he was there back in the 80s, retired in, was it 1990s? Maybe in 2000s. But he was there watching all the drug problems and so many homicides taking place that they're having to rent refrigerator trucks to house the bodies because the morgue is full. You know, all the refrigerated units are full. It's
Wow.
What was your opinion of working homicide? And of all those, which one did you enjoy working the most?
Well, obviously you aspire to homicide because you think it's the ultimate challenge to solve. So, and oftentimes it's the most difficult, unlike other property crimes or crimes against persons, because you don't have the victim there to tell you what happened most of the time. And so you're working oftentimes from a position of silence and trying to reconstruct what might have happened to this person that can't speak for themselves. Unlike other crimes where the victim can tell you what happened and open up doors to an investigation. So I had one, this was a really fascinating one, and involved a school teacher, and Robert Gardner was his name, and he didn't show up for work. He was a teacher, a Spanish teacher over at LA City College, and he didn't show up for work. So there was a welfare check conducted at his house, and when they did the welfare check, they noticed that the vehicle was gone. His car was gone. But there were some glowing lights on in the living room. And the responding officers asked the brother, "Do you mind if we kick in the front door? It's been days since anybody's heard of Robert. Robert's a professional. There's obviously something wrong. He's missing." They kick in the front door, and in this very dimly lit living room is this naked figure who's on his knees in his torso is in the bed of the couch. So he's on his knees, kind of almost in a prayer position.
Mm-hmm.
And then what appears to be, and there's huge butcher knives protruding out of his back. It appears that there's a figure standing over him. And the officer immediately, he's got his gun drawn. Again, it's dimly lit, and he's trying to make sense of what he's seeing. And he almost pulls the trigger and shoots this figure that's standing over what appears to be a deceased body. He's got a knife in his back.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as they acclimate to the lighting and figure out exactly what's going on, it's this life-size cardboard cutout of Stone Cold Steve Austin in nothing but like his wrestling briefs, that's it. It's a big life-size cutout, and the victim, Robert Gardner, is deceased, and he's been deceased for days. And so, I mean, the cop almost shot Stone Cold.
That's, Jamie McBride looks like him.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He does. He really does. So this investigation takes all kinds of twists and turns. Turns out that Robert Gardner had a life partner. And when that life partner died a year earlier, Robert Gardner became very promiscuous. He was going to different clubs in West Hollywood, and he befriended somebody and brought him home, and that led to him getting killed and his car getting stolen. It's a long story, but that one really always bothered me because we arrested a guy for it, we prosecuted a guy for it, but they found him not guilty. And to this day, I still feel like we had the right guy, but there was some technical issues involved that created a reasonable doubt. And that one really, really bothers me because we didn't give the family the satisfaction of seeing somebody held accountable for the death of a brother, an uncle, and that type of thing.
So when you were in narcotics, you mentioned that were you assigned to the DEA task force?
I was, yeah.
How long did you do that?
I was there, starting in 99. And that went until 2003, so 4 years. And then I stayed in it actually until 2006 when I went to robbery homicide. What was it, 99 to 2006, about 7 years.
I have to ask you, how did you like the DEA paperwork?
It was a learning curve, that's for sure.
It's a nightmare.
Yeah. Well, LAPD's wasn't much better. But this is back when we used to handwrite reports. So yeah, I get to look at some of these old LAPD reports and barely even make out what it thank God it's evolved and we report now on. But yeah, I had great counterparts at the DEA. So when I'd have to write the 6s or whatever proper reports, I can't remember what we called those, but it was a learning curve.
Yeah. It was. I was telling somebody recently that when we go through the DEA Academy, that there's actually a 1 hour class just on report numbers. There's so many of them that you progress up through the ranks, you become a supervisor, and your guys are bitching and complaining about the reports. First of all, I didn't make the rules. We just have to go by them. But when they would do it right and you'd go into court, most of your cases would plead out because you had your ducks in a row. So I guess there was a method to the madness, as they say.
I would agree with that. I was really, really impressed with the way that case files and stuff were put together on the DEA side. And you're right; they're very clear as to what is being said and done. That it basically structures the case and reports everything, in my opinion, in a much more professional way than we were doing at the LAPD. The LAPD, we had this philosophy that we have to keep everything as simple as possible because we're just a bunch of dumb.
Yeah. Bunch of knuckle grind.
Yeah. I mean, most of us don't even have, college educations, and some of us struggle with grammar and punctuation and all of that. And here we're handwriting reports. And so, we didn't have numbers. We had to call it what it was: a property report, a crime report, an impound report, because we wouldn't have been able to wrap our head around anything more complicated than that. And this even goes to our radio codes. You go to these other agencies, they're 10-6 or 915s and all this other stuff. And we're just like, hey, I'm here. We just kept it down to basic language. I'm on scene. I need a backup. Everybody else is using complicated codes.
I can see it both ways because when you're stressed, can you remember what that 10 code is that you need help? Well, that's the one everybody's going to remember. But I know a lot of places call it 1013, but when I was a city cop in West Virginia, and this was a small department, that's, send me a backup unit. That's what you said.
Yeah, it's crystal clear.
Yep. Yep. Especially if you had, we did call fights a signal 34. So if you went out on a 34, you had units coming after you anyway. There,
Oh,
and you're only talking four. On a good night, we might have 4 or 5 cars out. So, but the mountains of West Virginia, you're always in fights.
I
But
bet.
that
And
was that was
backup's probably a ways away.
well, in the city, you were probably backup was typically within 3 or 4 minutes, maybe 5 minutes at worst. And I always worked the evenings and midnights. I never worked day shift at all.
Mm.
Unless you were covering for somebody. But yeah, everybody looked out for everybody. When
3 minutes is a long time when you're in a fight.
you're not kidding, it's a long time. I mean, I can remember I was telling somebody the other day about a fight that I got in twice. That's 2 times that I can remember offhand, where we were so tired of fighting each other, we finally got each other in headlock. Then neither one of us would let go, and you're protecting your gun, trying to keep him away from getting to your gun. And then backup rolls up, and thank goodness it did. I wasn't a tough guy. Never pretended to be one. And so in Homicide, so when these guys were, and the guys being Tupac Shakur and Biggie Smalls, just because I can't remember their real names, were you a police officer when their deaths originally happened?
I was with the LAPD. Like I said, I became an LAPD officer in '88. Tupac was killed in '96. Biggie killed the following year in '97. So yeah, I probably had close to almost 10 years with the LAPD at that point in time.
And now Tupac was killed in Vegas, though, right? Not in L.A.
Correct. Yeah, it was originally a Vegas case. It still is a Vegas case, but we had some crossover because we always knew that there was a likelihood that the 2 murders would be somehow overlapping, or one would have some effect on the other.
Yeah, I tell you what, the more I read about it, the more questions I've got about it. Did you work on the original case?
No. So I came on as a cold case investigator in 2006. So I get involved in Biggie's murder almost 9 years after the fact. So he's killed in '97. It was originally Wilshire Division had the case for a short period of time, and then it was transferred over to Robbery Homicide Division, and then they had it from that point on. But because of some theory that was developed by a predecessor of mine, a guy named Russell Poole, another robbery homicide detective, he developed this theory that LAPD officers were involved. And he retired and wrote a book about it. That led to a lawsuit against the city because Biggie Smalls' mom and an attorney thought that what was in the book was enough to prove that LAPD was involved. And so they pursued this lawsuit. Because of the lawsuit, they put together a new cold case unit of homicide investigators to try to see if we could make headway into that murder case.
Yeah, I seem to remember reading that was a $400 million lawsuit they filed against L.A.
Yeah, that number gets a lot of attention. One of the pretrial hearings when the Wallace estate and Biggie Smalls family and their attorneys had got an economist to try to predict what Biggie Smalls' lifetime earning potential would have been. He came out with this number of $400 million. That would have been his lifetime earning. And so in a pre-trial hearing, the judge makes a comment that if she found that the department was responsible, then her judgment would be in the area of $400 million as a judgment against the city. And that really got the city's attention. Like, wow, that's crippling. So they said, we have to figure out if there's any truth behind these claims. So that created what was the unit that I became involved in.
That's kind of presumptive thing for a judge to say in open court when she hasn't even heard any evidence yet.
Yeah, the whole case was really interesting. It was in court, and then it got a mistrial, and then it was refiled, and then it went federal, and then it went back to the state. So that case was all over. It was extremely problematic for the plaintiffs. They were desperately trying to prove their case, and everything was falling out from underneath them. Their witnesses were going awry. Witnesses were recanting on their claims. I mean, everything that case was built on was essentially disproven. And so they had to continue, the attorneys had to continue to try to reimagine how to pursue, as you would, I'm sure, agree, this is all just trying to get a settlement. Just get
Exactly.
the department afraid enough to give us millions of dollars and we'll go away.
Yeah.
But the department was so confident in their position, they wouldn't settle at all. And that 400 million became 200 to 120 to all the way down to 2 million. And the LAPD was still, we're not settling. They would just not settle.
Good for them.
Yeah, they were like, you go to court and prove your case. And so that was what was going on within the civil case. Now, simultaneous to that is we're conducting this cold case criminal investigation, trying to solve it. And so these things were running kind of parallel to one another, which complicated it for us on the criminal side because the witnesses, the potential witnesses, Biggie Small's friends and the other witnesses that were there that night were plaintiff's witnesses. And so it was a conflict of interest for us to then, because of the lawsuit, go in and re-examine, re-interview, reapproach all of these witnesses. They were kind of off limits because of the lawsuit. So that kind of...
You got civil versus criminal investigations going on and they're competing with each other.
Right.
And what's more important, solving the murders or making sure that some, almost said something about a defense attorney, something bad about them, but making sure they get their pockets lined.
Well, that's exactly right. And you know what would have happened if we had gone and tried to approach any of these witnesses and confronted them on any inconsistencies. Of course, the attorneys for them are going to be, LAPD is coercing them, they're dissuading them, they're threatening them. So we had to keep arm's distance because we knew what these attorneys were likely to do to try to further their
Was
case.
there any basis for what Poole was alleging? What was why does he think there were rogue officers involved in this?
There was a lot going on with Poole, and there was definitely justification to pursue this theory to a certain degree. But with Poole, what happened, he lost his objectivity. And once he formulated this opinion, he could only see information and interpret information to support his foregone conclusions. And he was kind of rejecting and omitting information that refuted his preconceived notions. And so when he lost his objectivity, he got frustrated. People around him were like, hey, Russ, here's the problem with this informant. We can prove this informant's lying. We're putting all your eggs in this basket. He got really frustrated. He had a whole bunch of personal things happening in his life that I think affected his mindset. And out of that frustration, 19 years on the job, Steve, 19 years, less than a year away from securing a lifelong pension, he throws his hands up in the air and quits and walks away from the job.
Oh.
Yeah. And either he was just so convinced that he was right and the whole world was against him, or he's going through difficulties at home. His brother had just recently disappeared, just walked off the face of the earth. His brother had been missing. He had gotten into trouble with a secretary at work that he was having an affair with. He got in trouble over the misuse of some property at the LAPD. He's getting suspended. And so then he was transferred and reassigned from the case. All of these things led to his sense of like paranoia and that he thought, well, I'm just getting so close to the truth that all these external factors are just are ways of getting me distracted from proving what I believe to be true. And it was really sad. The whole thing became a really sad saga because he never quit. It ended up essentially costing him his life.
Oh, was he a homicide investigator or was he internal affairs? What was his attraction to the case?
He was a homicide investigator. He had worked South Bureau homicide, and then he had been brought up into robbery homicide division. And he'd been there just a short period of time before they inherit the Biggie Smalls murder. And then him and his senior partner, a guy named Fred Miller, end up getting the Biggie case. This is still back in 1997 when the case is relatively fresh. And then, he begins to pursue, because there's information coming out about off-duty officers that are working, moonlighting over at Death Row Records. So that raises a red flag for them. And then they establish that at least one LAPD officer is actually working and moonlighting over at Death Row Records for Suge Knight And so he starts to formulate this idea that Suge Knight has cops that that will carry out his dirty work.
And Suge Knight is a producer for Death Row.
He was the CEO of the label Death Row, and he was also the CEO of the label whom which Tupac Shakur was assigned.
Okay.
And so there's this nefarious type of association between off-duty cops from multiple different agencies in Southern California and Death Row Records. And so there's clearly a problem there that Russell Poole identifies. And then we have a guy named David Mack, who's an LAPD officer who goes out and robs a bank. And during the investigation of that bank robbery, there's some things to indicate that maybe he is a rogue cop working for Death Row. And so that all becomes very circumstantial. But for Russ Poole, it becomes more than just circumstantial, because this is going to get a little complicated, and I apologize. But at that same time, you have a cop-on-cop shooting wherein a black LAPD officer who is off duty, and it happens to be driving a car that is owned by Suge Knight's wife, Sharitha Knight. It's this Mitsubishi Montero guy named Kevin Gaines. Sharitha Knight's dating this cop. He's driving the car. He gets into a road rage incident with another LAPD cop, a guy named Frank Liga, who's a white guy who's working narcotics. He's actually on duty at the time, but he's plain clothes. He's got long hair. He looks a little bit like a Aryan brother.
A little grubby.
A little grubby. And so these two guys see each other on the street, and they start giving each other hard looks, and then it's fuck you and fuck you. Kevin Gaines pulls out a gun. Frank Liga's already pulled his gun. He shoots and kills Kevin Gaines. And so now you've got this cop-on-cop shooting, both LAPD officers, and Russ Poole is one of the individuals assigned to investigate this shooting. And he notices that Kevin Gaines is dating Sharitha Knight, Suge Knight's wife. So this whole circumstantial world is starting to kind of formulate for his theory. And so that is what ultimately leads him down this rabbit hole of putting together speculation and hearsay and bad informant information.
Yeah.
Until he's convinced that he's on the right track.
Hey, players, that's the end of part 1. Part 2 comes out, as always, on Tuesday. In the meantime, just a reminder that Game of Crimes is now posting interview videos on YouTube. You can find those at Game of Crimes Podcast. Our website is gameofcrimespodcast.com, where you'll find all our episodes, our guests, book lists, merchandise, and more. And for more content, join us on patreon.com/gameofcrimes. I have several monthly episodes that range from silly to serious, so come on over and join the fun. In the meantime, everyone stay safe. I'll see you tomorrow for part 2.